So, welcome back to another video from Grounded, home of mindfulness, meditation, self-exploration. Now, if you see on my storyboard earlier, I did post a picture of this. Now, this board I wrote up this morning, and it's basically a detailed write-up of the sort of overview of the difference between love, life, truth, which some might call God. I don't like using the word God. You can use the word infinity, you can use the word source, you can use the word universal intelligence, however you wish to call that, versus living past, which is what I class as sense of self. Now, as you can see, between the two, I have these kind of two different descriptive meanings, or a summarization of how each one is reflected, how each state is reflected. So we have two states to start off with. The first one's the state of pure awareness, which is the awareness of your truth, the awareness of your true nature, the awareness of who you truly are. And then the second one is the living past, which is the self, which is the illusion. So we all hear of ego and self. Well, ego and self, which we class as the illusion, or we class as our sense of self, gives rise through a number of methods. So I'm actually going to demonstrate on this board how this sense of self comes about. And then through that demonstration, you can have a little bit of an understanding of how your personal sense of self, which is your thoughts and your emotions, are developed. But first of all, I want to just touch upon the difference between the two states. And obviously, from starting off with love, truth, and life, either on the other side, I've given its opposite, which is in the self. So, love, life and truth is the field of infinity. So, love, life and truth is the field of conscious awareness, universal intelligence, that which you truly are. Key point, you are truly that. Versus field of the past. So, a personal sense of self is derived from the past. When we're in a personal sense of self, we're reflecting on memory. So personal sense of self is past. So it's the field of the past. Self is field of the past. Consciousness is field of infinity. The second one I've got is present moment. So when we're awakened, we're always truly aligned with the present moment. So we're always now. The point in which your whole life unfolds. Whereas in self, we're in reflection, projection. So when we're in our sense of self, we are thinking about the past, projecting into the future. And then we have the awareness of consciousness, which is pure awareness. Just purely aware of the infinite creator that you truly are, versus self-awareness. Now, self-awareness is me, myself, my mind, my body, this identity. And then we have, when we're truly awakened, we are living in fulfillment. We're fulfilled all of the time because of our connection with Source. Whereas when we're in our personal sense of self, we're in a state of isolation and separation because we believe that we are this individual point. We believe that we are this person. And then we have non-attachment in the connection with Source, because you're not attached to anything, because you realize that which is the source of all that comes, of all of existence. But when we're in the self, we're in our attachments to our likes and our dislikes. And then we have a relationship to life. So our pure awareness is relating to life, relating to now, relating to source, relating to the essence of it all. Whereas when we're in self, we're relating to the past. So our sense of self, like I said, is a relationship with the past. So let's break down how living past self is developed. Now, as you can see, I have some absolutely awesome pictures that I've drawn up. Art is where I truly accelerate. But underneath living past sense of self, you have impressions. And now I want you to understand what an impression is. So this is what this is about. Now, an impression is a emotional reaction in the body. So say, for instance, you're out and you experience something negative, say something traumatic like an event or something. What it actually does is it forces awareness into the body. So you have an external stimulus from the world. That external stimulus, using this scenario of something that's putting your life in danger, creates an emotional reaction in the body. Now, this emotional reaction elicits a chemical reaction in the body, and this is what we class an emotion. Now, as that emotional reaction happens in the body instinctively reacts. And then that reaction creates a memory in the body. So an impression is an emotional reaction in the emotional body created by an external stimulus, so a stimulus from the world. So as the emotional body reacts, the instinctive emotional body, which is that chemical reaction, say for instance in this moment we're dealing with something that's endangering us, we have the fight, flight or the freeze response. And the other response we have is the rest and digest. So anyway, as we have this response, this emotional reaction in the body, this is an impression. Okay? And this part is perfectly natural. This is what the body is designed to do. This is how evolution continues, because these impressions become stored, as I'll put it, impressions create memory, but they also create impressions into the DNA. So, for instance, we've experienced something that's life-threatening, the emotional reactions happened in the body. That emotional reaction relays information, which becomes an imprint, which becomes an impression in the memory. It becomes an impression within your DNA. So your body, through this emotional reaction, is storing information. And this will help when it comes to reproducing. Them DNA, them genes are passed over. And then in the next life form that has that information of that impression. And it's that impression that helps the survival, that helps evolution to adapt and to evolve. It evolves through impressions. Okay, so stay with me if you're on topic so far. Now this external stimulus creating emotional reaction, creating memory, cell memory, DNA memory, is part of evolution. This is perfectly normal, perfectly beautiful in the mechanics of our body, in the mechanics of our life form. For if this didn't happen, this instinctive reactive patterns, then we'd die out pretty quick. So we're really talking about the evolutionary process behind that propels life forward. But here's the problem. Here's where the self develops. Now, self-awareness, because human beings, we have that capability of self-awareness. We know that we exist. We are the only true species on this planet that has that real deep, profound realization that I exist. But in the very first point of that realization is I exist as a mind and body. So self-awareness is identified with the body and with the mind. Now, with the body and the mind, we have the ability to interpret and we have the ability to reflect. So self-awareness gives us the ability to reflect. Now the problem with interpretation and reflecting is we are recalling. So if we're not interpreting an emotion then and there, through the mind interpreting and adding meaning, we recall emotions. So say for instance that anger's our life's been threatened, fight or flight, we've jogged on. But the emotion's still there and we can add meaning to it. Now what happens when we reflect and when we add meaning is we create this like or dislike. And when we recall memory, when we reflect on memory, we are creating feelings, we are reliving the past, we are reliving that experience. So when we're recalling it, it's coming up as a feeling. And then we add our meaning to that feeling. We add our meaning to that emotion. And this is where we get like and dislike. So this is the very basis of how our sense of self begins to develop. Because we begin to interpret emotion through the ability to reflect, through the ability to recall. We can bring that experience back to life. And then when we add meaning to it, we're creating these likes and dislikes within us. And these likes and dislikes are emotional charges because you're recalling the past, because you're recalling an emotion. Which then, an emotion was something that happened in the moment. And the body adapted and dealt with it beautifully. But when we recall it, it becomes a feeling. And then when we add meaning to feeling, we get likes and dislikes. And this is where the personal sense of self begins to develop. Your personal sense of self is your labels, your meaning to which you've given to these events. So how this actually works out is pure awareness. If you can see down this bottom one, pure awareness identified with body and mind. Now how this translates is body is the impressions of emotion, and mind is the interpretation. So we have pure awareness identified with mind and body, which is the impressions, the emotions, adding mental label, creating like and dislike, and that's the interpretation. So that's where the mind comes in, because it's through the mind we interpret the emotion. And then what that does is it creates emotionality, which people call as personality. Personality is your likes and dislikes. Emotionality, so when I'm talking about personality, I'm talking about emotionality, what you've emotionalized. And that, what you've emotionalized, your likes and dislikes and your interpretation creates self. Now, your personal sense of self, if you look at it as a set of filters, when you add meaning and interpret, you create a filter. And then it's that filter, which you class as yourself, that you look out on life through. So you're looking at life through your filters. And so this becomes me, my sense of self, but it's also living past, because you are using these filters to look at the present. You are using these filters to look out at your life. Your sense of self is developed around your filters. Your filters are developed around your interpretation of emotion. And so your sense of self is emotionality. It's emotional based. It's your likes and your dislikes. Now I'm going to go in at a later date on how these negative impressions become suppressed in the subconscious, because that are really expanding on how this sense of self is developed. This is a basic overall of what's going on. So the sense of self is how I've just spoke it. Sense of self develops through this. But we're still talking about pure awareness. We're still talking about the infinity that you are, true consciousness that you are, identified with these impressions, identified with your interpretations, identified with the filters. It hasn't woke up, hasn't tasted, hasn't realized its own beautiful essence of the oneness that you truly are. So let me show you, because this represents how complicated human beings are. We are seriously complicated people. Personality is many, 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 many different parts of emotionality coming together. And so your personality has loads of different parts to it. Let's take a little look at freedom. Oh, beautiful word, freedom. So this is where awareness has awakened, and it's aware of these squiggly lines, is aware of life, is aware of source. It's not identified with the world. It's not identified with the impressions. Awareness is aware of itself before existence. It's aware of the source of it all. It's aware of its own essence, that which hasn't been created, that which has never existed and never will exist, because it's what makes up existence. Now you can try to get onto the scientists, and I love scientists, and I love what scientists are trying to do, but scientists still create subject and object, and so they will never, ever, ever, ever get to the root of truth. Never, ever get to the root of self-realization. Because they are looking externally, they are looking subject and object, whereas the truth of life can only be found in the realization of nothing, of pure, infinite nothing, or nothing to speak of, or nothing to know, because it's beyond form. It's formless. You can't know it as other. You can't know it as other apart from yourself. You can't know it as something other than you. You can't even mentally know it, because the mind is for interpreting. You can't interpret it, so you can't know it on a mental level. You can only be it. You can only melt into it, realize it, love it, connect with it. Anyway, off topic. So, awareness, life source. So awareness or life source is aware of the essence, and the world is projected out of this essence, out of life. It's made up of life. So basically, there is no sense of self. This is what dissolves when you go through awakening. This sense of self dissolves. It's obsolete. It's an illusion. And what actually happens is awareness realizes life. And then there's no more attachments to the world. There's no more relating to your past. There's no more this personal sense of self. There is just the realization of I am. The one infinite being. And you are that. The intelligence behind it all. And you are that. You are infinity. You are endless, unfathomable, unknowable. Because if it was knowable, then it wouldn't be infinity. It wouldn't be infinite if it was knowable. But yet, when you realize this state, in the unknown is a deep intelligence. The intelligence of life. So when you surrender into that, you surrender into nothing, but nothing to speak of, nothing to know, nothing to objectify, just the truth of life, of reality. Anyway, that's a little bit about a little bit. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you'd like me to take a picture of this and to put it in a shot so you can see it more clearly, then feel free to post a comment below. I'll put a box up in my story mode if you wish to ask any more questions. So anyway, guys, I very much enjoyed explaining that lovely, beautiful artwork to you. Much love.